Live caption. Share screen. Okay, so in this week we are going to cover Unit 11. You can find the content of the unit on Canvas page or the course room. The notes is located here, and then I'll post the lecture and lab video, but right now we're going to go over the assignment like what we usually do. So in chapter 11, it begins with talking about security policy. This is an area that's very important for us. Not only that we want the people to follow the rules, but we use it to really configure our system and make sure that our systems are managed over time based on the set of rules. We have policies for everything. So when you hear the term policy, it's really a set of rules that is applied to practices, operation, and also configuration. And so in a lot of different areas that we would apply security policy to. So for example, we would apply security policy to acceptable use, what is allowed for the user and what is not allowed. And with that, we can configure different things from application to resources on the network. We also use security policy to configure for data classification, the type of data. As last week, we talked about encryption. So you can protect data, right? Data at rest, data on the move, and so on. So in the first question, it asks you, why is security policy important in an organization? It is really because it allows us to look at how we can control, right, the people, which is administrative control, and to manage our risk and eventually mitigate our risk to an acceptable level. We understand that we cannot remove risk 100%. Not all risk can be removed, or it can be reduced down to something acceptable. So security policy not only affect the technical side, but it's really allowing us to administratively control the asset in the organization and its operation. As you know, that most businesses use information systems to run their business. So for example, if we're looking at RCCD, the school, right, our district, all the colleges within, we would see that student use systems, staff, faculty use systems. So we got to make sure that we maintain those systems by following the rules. So as part of our task is to really write or establish these rules. And you can find templates online and be able to modify or customize the policy to your organization. Hi. We just got started with Unit 11. So when you write your policy, what should it include? So overall, you're going to see a brief high-level statement that really addresses the goals or the objective of the organization. Principles. So how can I establish that? I can look at the organization mission statement, what they're really aiming to do. So for our district, or let's say Moreno Valley College, right? We aim to provide accessibility to students along with making sure that our students have equity and be able to become successful in their education career. So with that, we have to look at how that can be achieved via the people and the systems within. So you would write a brief, right, set of statements that would address the goals of the organization. If I look at an organization that does more retailing, right, their objective and goals would be to provide products or service to the customer. And so with that, we have to think about how the processes that can be incorporated to be able to build out the products and the service retailing for that company. And a thing that we should always include in our policy is what's called the standard operation procedures, your SOP. This is a step-by-step. When you see the word procedure, that's a step-by-step instruction on how they can use the policy to perform everyday's tasks. So if I'm looking at an AUP, acceptable use policy, I would look at that as how the user can access resources from the PC all the way to network level, like internet browser, applications, network drives, and what they are allowed or not allowed to do. So that brings us to the next question. What is an acceptable use policy? So when you see the acronym AUP, it stands for acceptable use policy. And this is in your notes as well. It defines how the system is properly used, the rules of behavior of the employees when they're using the system. It also describes the purpose of the system and the network, sometimes more than one network, and how the user can access the resources and their responsibility in those systems or for those systems. So for example, I might have employees that use mobile devices, laptops, mobile smartphones, scanners, etc. I want to make sure that I specify exactly what type of systems that will be utilized by these users and how it should be acceptable to be used. For example, if we issue a laptop to the employee, we want to state that they need to make sure that they are safely using the resources, meaning that when they're connecting to our wireless network, right, they have to accept the agreement and then it's going to scan for malware. Or if they're using virtual private network, the VPN, how they should be connecting to the virtual private network communication line. The third thing is that it should include definitions and examples of what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, especially. So some of the definition that you might see, it might seem very common, for example, like malware. You have to state what that is, assuming that not all your users are aware of the technical terms, the type of malware, or when you state the specific acronyms or terminology that is technically related. So you normally would see a list of definitions that's included in the policy. Not in this class, but in other classes. And if you do go for your bachelor's degree, it's likely that you will be asked to write a policy. This is very common in the security field. Some company already has a set of policy and you have to go in and revise it. Other companies, they might not have policy, you have to write it. So when you see acceptable use, that's just a list of rules that what is allowed and not allowed. So for example, I want to state that it is not allowed for the employees to gamble online while they're at work using our network resources like your internet connection or visiting pornography websites. And you have to be very specific because if they accept and sign the policy, if there's violation in the case, right, you would also have to state in your policy what the first, second level, or third violation means, right? And so in that case, you know, that will go into HR and then they can get dismissed in the case if they violate that multiple times. So some companies are more tolerant with what you use their resources for, like shopping online or visiting websites. Other companies don't allow that, right? So it's really individual company on what their mission and goals and internal policy would be, or internal requirement would be. Any questions regarding policy? So this is more of the administrative area that we have to deal with, and it really ties back to the business operation because they use information system for business and we gotta protect it. Okay, so are we okay with this? And so where can I find templates for this? You can, of course, find a bunch of example online. Some company, they will post on their website. SAN, S-A-N, right? SAN, S-A-N-S, the website itself, they do have a lot of templates. There are government-based templates that you can also utilize. Okay, so you would start with looking at some templates and how you can build that out. We don't build everything from scratch, of course. In IT, we use existing resources and then expand on it. Okay, so let's come back to that shortly. So in the notes, it gives you information about the AUP, right? What's required. And then some of the other areas that we have to address to prevent or reduce the risk of fraudulent. For example, taking vacation, right? A lot of the companies for the major employees, like the people who handles a lot of the tasks that's in operation, like managers or executives, sometimes they don't take vacations for years. And when they do, you start to find out issues, right? Things are missing, reports are not being documented, stuff like that. So mandatory vacation policies required. Separation of duties. This is a principle that prevents a single person to handle the major tasks. So if we're looking at IT, one backup operator is not good, but we want to have two backup operator or more. Because in the case if that person quit, leaves, or something happens to that person, we have another individual that's going to handle. Companies tend to get crippled when a major person is gone. So we want to make sure that we have SOD, separation of duties. And it also prevents fraudulent and theft because you do have another person that works with the other individual to really check and verify. Least privilege rule is important in system applications and everything that we do. Give the user what they need only, right? And then you would have a process on how they can request additional resources. Okay, and that needs to be documented because we deal with the legal side quite a bit. People get fired, they come back and sue the company. We want to pool things, or if there's fraudulent case where people infiltrate or they exfiltrate data, that means they take data and send it outside. So in that case, we have to make sure we have the breadcrumbs and the information for the case. Also, job rotation and clear desk policy. Some of the things that we deal with is sensitive data, like your personal healthcare information or employees' healthcare information, right? Sensitive engineering or proprietary design. So job rotation requires people to go from one position to another in that team, and it allows you to check for fraudulent. Then clear desk policy is common in a lot of government agencies. So when you come in, you've seen the movies, right? Snowden comes in, he can't bring USB or anything else. When you leave, you can't take anything out. When you're at your work, you cannot print things and leave it on your desk. And if you do, you have to shred it, right? Because there are people who print out sensitive data and they leave it on their desk and other people can walk by and grab the files, or they throw it in the trash and people can dumpster that, right? So clear desk policy is very common in large corporations and also government agencies. Then you have the common thing, and this is for most of your job. So in IT, background check is a big deal, right? Because you deal with information that's privy to you and not others. And so not only that, employees within, they also have different level of background check. Now, just aside, right, if you apply for an IT position, if there's something that might flag, make sure that you are clear on the application, when that happens, why that happens. And even if it is expunged, make sure you state it, because if they find out and you didn't put it down there, it's going to become a problem. Okay. I've had people that finished my programs that had gone through that, like they finished the third interview or second interview and they couldn't get hired because of that. So background check, usually just check the intention and the characteristic of the individual. And California has a law where we don't look anything above 7 years. Yeah. Criminal activities that relates to fraudulent or theft. And also, some company look at violence, but usually a lot of the time they look at theft related things. That means that they also look at your credit history. Now, credit history is really, it depends on the state law. Some state, like for us, I think California is a little bit more flexible with that, where some company, they don't require that. But when you deal with financial company or company that has a lot of financial systems, they look at that because it is a way for them to analyze that individual and see if that person potentially can commit fraud or not. Especially when you deal with bank transactions that's in high dollars or accounts that's very high end accounts. So now if people they don't expect you to have an excellent credit history, but if you have a decent credit history, that's okay. Because, it's expected that when we deal with COVID and different things that people go in debt. But if anything, you should be very honest and clear. And that usually is what they're looking for. I've dealt with companies that hire people that file bankruptcy, and then some company, they don't hire people for bankruptcy. So it really depends on the case and also the organization. But just be clear. And that's an area that I think for us, like, that's a must, right? Usually most company, they check background. If you are required to drive from location to another, they're going to look at your DMV records and things like that. So I was a field technician for a while, and sometimes I have to drive their vehicle. And so that was submitted at the beginning as well. So you should expect that, right? Travel and things like that. Also for us, non-disclosure agreement is very important. Okay, be careful what you say about what you do. Even on a phone conversation or casually at the party with friends. Things that people post in social media, avoid posting anything that relates to work, drinking, drug usage, and so on, right? Because they do, now it's part of the social media piece, is part of your background check as well. They will ask you for, so if you work for a government agency, NSA, DOD, and or any company that contract with the government, they will ask for your social media account information, and they will access it to see, right? Or they will ask you to add them as a friend, and so they can look at all your posts and things like that. So, remove some of the posts that might impose something, and then change your privacy settings, and also like just avoid posting anything that's related to the job or potentially your job, right? So that's, I know it's common sense nowadays, but I met with the employers a week ago for advisory meeting, and they asked me to make sure that you understand, right? Some NDA, you can never say anything about the prior job. I did a job that I can never tell anybody else, even my family members, what I did, right? And then there's some jobs that will require you to hold an NDA for a certain amount of year until that information is public, then you can disclose the information, especially with military and government. Sometimes you can't say anything until that information becomes public. Okay? Especially secret mission and things like that you deal with. So, but most company in general make you sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. Make sure you read it carefully before you sign, okay? All my interns that did the DOD contract, they all signed this. And I tell them, I said, even with your family members, you cannot say what you did for that company, okay? All right. So for the next part, we can answer these questions. Why are all these things important? really, ultimately, it is to help detect if there's any malicious activity internally and externally that relates to fraud or embezzlement. It really helps a company prevent fraud, theft, and errors. Right? I read a case at DMV in Nevada. One of the employees accidentally sent out people information on an Excel spreadsheet, and that could have been flagged by the IT department. So she attached the wrong file in the email, and she argued that it's not intentional, it was an accident. Right, 2,000 records were lost, and they calculated how much records would cost them to recover. Right, because once that had left the company, right, that can be sent to other people and other entity and so on. So you have to track where the information goes. Also, company wants to prevent disclosure of sensitive data and data theft. So data is a crucial element in our world. Making sure that you protect the data, right? Because it costs money to build, and it's important, it's sensitive. And so for the least privilege principle, why is it applied to all user accounts? Because your user accounts are related to services and application, right? We normally assign the user privilege to, let's say, all users can use internet browser, but not all users can use virtual private network connection or application to human resource database or financial system or healthcare system, right? So the services which ties to your protocol and the applications uses those services are connected to the privilege on the account. So the accounts are set inside group membership, and the membership allows us to control who can access what. Okay, so in that context, we can say that it is important to apply this at the least privilege to control access to only necessary resources. So if I am in IT department, right, I don't necessarily need to have full access to financial systems. I might need privilege to back up their financial system, but not to use the full application or to modify certain things, right? So you really need to take a look at how we can control that with role-based for the individual accounts. Most of the time we apply role-based, who they are in the organization and what they can access. And number 6, it's really in your opinion, right? In your opinion, is background check necessary? And so if you're looking at enterprise level, how can you distinguish one person from the next, right? And the risk behind their characteristics. Given that sometimes you can have people that have flagged history, but they've changed, right? They have improved. So those background checks really represent who they are 10 years ago compared to today, or 7 years ago for California requirements, right? So they look at your work history and say, okay, well, were you a good worker, and your references, correct? But potentially it is really a way to detect the behavior of the individual, because we never worked with these people before, so we have to use some kind of history to really establish that ground. And so that's what companies argue, right? And then there are people who say, you know what, I don't think background check is needed, right? And so some company, they do the basic background check, right, to see what you state on your application is correct, but they don't look a lot further into your background. So it really varies. So in my opinion, right, if I own a company, yes, I would have background check just to make sure that my decision to hire these individuals, I can trust them, right? And then for the non-disclosure agreement, we use this to protect proprietary data that is being shared or could potentially be shared with non-authorized individuals. And so when we say data, that could also entail information like phone calls, conversation, things like that, right? So when you look at like secret research, right, for R&D for some company, their engineers, their researcher, their scientists cannot disclose the information of what they are researching and the content of that, right? Until it's allowed to be published, to go public. And so there's a lot of talk. So the FBI, they investigate a lot of the things that has to do with warfare, right? On how one nation can, or organization or enterprise can go and steal data from the other. Boeing is a good example, right? That happened recently, a year or two ago, where their design to planes were leaked, and it was told, right? I can't have a full proof that some of the engineers actually were bought by a company in China to leak the design. So the Chinese company launched, right, a model of the plane exactly like the Boeing, but a little better, right, to just beat them in the market. So you have competitors that will also do that, along with like, dealing with, nation safety related things in the warfare aspect. Okay. Okay, so when you hire the employee, part of our task in IT and security is two things that's relating to onboarding and offboarding. When you onboard someone, you basically make sure that their user accounts and information exists in the system. So you add the account to the server, and you would tie that account to the privileges. So when I say privilege, that means that their rights to a certain system or system resources. So for example, a privilege can be that I cannot shut down the computer, right? I can only use the computer but cannot shut down. Or I cannot install any application on that computer, right? So that means that at the least privilege, I can't install the application. So if I need an application installed, where do I go? I go to the IT department and put in a ticket request. And so they would allow me to install or not, depending on how I justify my reason to install the application. So when you onboard someone, you make sure that that person has access at the least privilege. When you offboard someone, you remove that account. So that's a loosely term, removing an account, right? We should disable the account before we remove it. So that just means that we disable their privilege that's associated. So that means that if that person's fired, they quit, or they could be promoted into another location. So we have to modify, right? We have to disable access to one location and enable it at another location. So a lot of my students are in this area right now. They deal with Active Directory on the daily basis, and that's what they do. Okay. Any question? Okay, so let's talk about external entity. So you might have vendor or third-party individual, and supply chain is very big right now in the security community. Right? We know that because there are shortage of worker and resources. So because of COVID, we deal with a big issue in supply chain. But supply chain means that you have any vendor in that chain that provide products or services for your operation. Like we talked about before with the coffee shop, right? The companies that make your paper cups to the company that sells you coffee beans, right? Or dairy farmer, things like that, that really build out the supply chain for your organization. Now, they also require access in some cases, right? To receive payments from your accountable, to process invoice and billing. In some cases, also database access. So for example, right, if I'm Walmart, I buy a lot of products from different companies, including Disney, right? So Disney supply clothing, right? School supplies, toys, all kinds of things for Walmart. That's Disney branded. And so they would be able to access the part of the inventory database to check their sales and also their inventory. So how does Disney know when Walmart needs something, right? If so, in that we have to really think about how we would allow or limit the vendor access to internal network and data. Should they have access to everything that we use? No, right? And we would make sure that they have a privilege that ties to the credential for that particular application. And so most of the time the database is tied to a web-based application. So you got to make sure that, you know, you create an account for them for that application and control that account. Because if they become vulnerable to attacks, right, then that's also tied to you and you are tied to other vendors. Okay. So they can actually fingerprint all of the, you know, the application and the resources by just following the breadcrumbs. One application to a system to another system, and so on. And that's how they can find their ways through. I'm talking about them as attackers. So we need to make sure that we also allow vendor diversity. That just means that you would use multiple vendors for the same product. And if the companies that's facing supply chain issues that they don't use diversity in vendors, so you might have a contract with someone, and in that contract they say you cannot purchase the same product with somebody else, so they're going to give you 50% discount, right? So with that, you're limited to that vendor. And if something happens to that vendor, or if something happens to their vendor, you're done, right? Remember we talked about the pulp for the paper, and then when the ships got attacked in Indian Ocean, right, the companies didn't receive paper pulp, and without paper pulp they couldn't produce toilet paper or other paper products here in the United States. So it's all crumbling down, right? And so that just delayed, and so that drives up the price for the product because it becomes scarcity. But then at the same time, right, you have companies that are not able to produce or manufacture because they just don't have the raw material. Okay, now when you deal with services, you have to go into certain agreement. Okay, we'll talk about the type of agreement after number 10. But when you have an end of life service or the end of service life, that means that, let's say that I contract with the company that built out my app, and after a while that company goes out of business, right? They get dissolved, and so they would notify me that after, you know, this year we're going to be done, we're going to get dissolved, and we're going to go and work for somebody else. We're not going to have the app for you anymore. That means that they can't maintain my app, they cannot update my app, so I'm going to have issues. Okay, so what can I do? I have to look for another individual that's going to be able to migrate, take all the data that I have from that app and transition it to a new application. This is a very important area, and it's always challenging for us to do this part. If you ask any IT manager or project manager if data migration is easy from one app to another, they'll tell you no, right? Because sometimes you have conflict, you have issues, right? Even if you hire the developer to work with that existing application and transition it to a newer version, you still run into issues, right? So there's severe testing and resource that's needed for that migration, and it takes time. So I would need to devote resources to make sure that my data gets migrated into the new application. And then I would take the old data and I would secure it. Because this is where the attacker is going to look to see what you're doing with the old stuff. Stuff like from 1980s and it's still being around and there's no security, right? So people don't archive and protect it. So you can use encryption, you can use other resources to make sure it's protected. Okay. Any questions? All right. So we also need to go through some form of agreement with the company, right? So it's very common in our world that things get contracted out because it is cheaper elsewhere, right? Or they would have the expertise in that. So for example, I won't buy server rack, I'll just hire Amazon, right? I'll contract with Amazon and they're gonna house most of my stuff. So it saved me some money in the long run, right? Return on investment, I can establish a higher return on investment if I use cloud. Or instead of fixing all the basic hardware, I would contract that out to Xerox or a company that does it instead of hiring the actual IT technician, right? And make sure that they have benefits and all of these things, okay? Amazon does this, they staff out most of their workers, that's non-corporate, and then their corporate workers are hired through Amazon corporate office, right? But the workers, the temporary worker, they have to go through a certain amount of years before they can apply for the corporate position. And same thing with Kaiser or other organization. So when you have companies that agree with another company, so in A, it says ABC Corporation acquired infrastructure as a service cloud, right? From AWS, which is owned by Amazon. AWS stands for Amazon Web Service, to assure availability of 99.9999%. The key word there is assure availability. That's what I want on that contract if I'm ABC, right? If they don't fulfill that, they're gonna have to pay the penalty for not fulfilling that. And that needs to be really clear when it goes into legal before they sign. So what you establish there is service level agreement. It's a type of service that they need to provide and they need to meet your role. If they don't, right, then they have to pay the difference. So the big difference in SLA and the MOU is the SLA, there's a penalty if it's not, that service is not met. Okay. And you see that with a lot of contractors from building homes, repairing homes to cars and things like that too. Okay. For B, when you establish a partner between with one company and another, so if two companies agrees to maintain a healthcare system and everybody share the 50% in cost and maintenance, right? You will need to, number one, establish an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding. That just state what their responsibility would be. Number two, a business partnership agreement, a BPA, which just established, like, I agree that I'm going to maintain 50% of this database while you are going to maintain 50% of the database, and be more clear on the responsibility, which entails this, right? Listed it out. And the third one, two companies collaborate on a web application to market their products to the customer. And anything that they would make as profit, they would share that. And it could be a percentage, right? One might be equal or more, depends. So that is more specific to a BPA, business partners agreement. That usually relates to product shares and other things. And some of this, sometimes you would see in partnership, and then sometimes to really avoid all of these things, they just do an acquisition. That means I'll just buy you out, right? To really get rid, just also to eliminate competition and things like that too. Okay, questions? So you can find the specific information, right? And additional things that I put down there. There's your agreement types. So I didn't put down the ISA here, interconnection security agreement. This is very important when you work with cloud company. I forgot to include that for the SLA with the AWS or company that provides communication for your company. Okay, or IT services for that matter. Okay, so this really addressed the planning, establishment, maintenance, and disconnection between two entities that would relate to the technical and the security area, wireless, wired, and everything else in between. Okay. So why do we say this to you? Why do I give you this information? Because sometimes when you get to the job, this you have to go back here and see, right, what was established, and if there was something wrong, you would need to go to that third-party vendor and talk to them about it. Okay, fix the problem. Sometimes we have to deal with that. Okay, so for analysis, you would use tools to really look at your performance, right, to build out some historical statistic and things like that. And that's what we do, is we look at the measurement and doing analysis for your system, your application, and so on. Okay, so let's talk about data. So data is, we should always identify, classify, and label our data. Okay, so how do last week we talked about data on the move, right? We categorize those data so you can identify the data. Then you would need to classify them to different level like this: public data, proprietary data, private data, and you write a policy that states how you protect the data at different classes. And so when you put in a class, you label it. Okay, and you would use appropriate technical tool to make sure you protect it. So here I put down some information for you regarding that. And when we're done with the data, we have to do something with it, right? We have to get rid of it. So in the destruction, there's so many things that we need to do. Okay, you can't just throw your disk in the garbage because somebody can get your data, right? So you got to make sure that you purge it accordingly. Your physical file, paper file, when you work with healthcare companies. So I had a client, the doctor decided that he's not going to digitize everything, right? Because it costs money. Every year he pays a fine. Every year it increases. So now if he decides to digitize things, we put everything in the computer and we shred the file, right? Because patient file has a lot of information that people can take. You gotta wipe, you gotta erase. And then in the olden days, they put things into a burner, like a physical fire, and burn the files, right? We don't do that anymore. You can actually hire a company that shred everything for you. If you've seen Cintas, they do a lot of different things. So they drive the big 18-wheeler truck to your company, and they give you these bin, looks like trash bins that's locked, and it has a slot. You just slide the paper files, and then there's a bin for your electronics, CDs, USB, everything. And they have these machines on the trucks, and so the technician, the specialists, they would wheel these things in there, and they would put the files and all the electronics into the machines, and then they would give you a receipt. Okay, so you can do that. Okay, or you can buy like the machines and put it at your company. There are places that can punch stuff through your hardware, like your hard drive, your motherboard, things like that, before you e-cycle it. Okay, so you can hire those companies and then establish a contract with them. Okay, so let's come back here. We talked about how data is important in an organization, right? Because data classification allows you to ensure the user the value of the data and how you're going to protect that data. And your user can be customer, right? Or employees. A lot of the time clients, okay? So for example, if I own a real estate company, I want to make sure that I classify my data, okay? Because it has people tax information, right? Financial information, bank accounts, all kinds of things. So if you no longer need the data, you can copy and paste it over or summarize it. You can purge it. We can sanitize by removing the data from the device. Okay, so as I tell you, we use a lot of flash memory now, right? When you delete the files, they don't go away. So somebody can scan your storage and be able to retrieve it if it's not written over. So think about that, right? We have to shred the physical file. We can wipe. So it's a process that remove all data from the disk, and you can simply zero everything out on your disk. You need to do it multiple times. So it writes a 0 to your disk, right? That's really scrubbing it down to all 0. Now, even if you format your disk, remember how you use the software format, right? It doesn't necessarily rewrite things over. You know that, right? If that space is still accessible and it still retains the old data, it is recoverable. Only when data is written over is when it's gone. Okay, so we can burn, bless you, paper shredding, file shredding. And of course, we have applications that will do that for us as well now. I think in CompTIA 8 plus CIS27, it talks about some of this too, degaussing, right? You've seen this in the movies. Anyone watch Hackers? Oh, if you haven't seen it, watch it. Maybe it's on YouTube. You see, they do phone freaking and all kinds of things on there. Old school, but you know, the goodies, the stuff that we got from stuff from the 80s, transition to what it is now. So degaussing, right, is a way that you can apply magnetic to the drive to make it unreadable. Anytime that you apply storage to magnetic, right, it makes it unreadable. People also put it in microwave, but that's very dangerous. I don't recommend that. Pulverizing is to really physical destroy the media, right? I think I told you this. I don't know if it's on YouTube anymore, but I saw a YouTube video a long time ago that a guy ran over a smartphone with a car and then disassemble it and took out the storage on it and be able to still recover data from it. So as long as the physical device that stores it is not damaged, right? So people can also punch holes through storage and boards and things like that. So pulverizing, that's what it will be. Any question? So that's how you physically and logically destroy data. So data retention is different from one company to the next, right? What do you think about a school? When do we destroy data? So let's say if I graduated, let's say I'm a student that graduated in 1982. And I went through life, and then one day I decided that I wanted to go and get a higher degree. Right? I come back to the school and I say, hey, I need my transcript. They will be able to still pull it up on their old system, right? They might have transition system. Now, in the case where the school no longer have access to it, you have to go to the Department of Education. They have all the data for all the students that went to all school that's accredited in the United States. Even if the school is no longer open. Let's say that the school burns down, it's no longer there, or they file bankruptcy and left, right? So you can go to the Department of Ed and ask for your stuff. So in that case, sometimes school will archive stuff to the Department of Ed and then they purge the data. But most of the time they retain data forever. Lots and lots of storage, right? Yeah, it's crazy. You know how many students has gone through public school or private school? It's a long time and for a lot of people and a lot of data. Hey, how you doing? Okay, so on the side, before we talked about regulation, so make sure we understand the difference between PII and PHI, because you're gonna see some of that when you deal with HIPAA, right? Every company buys, the large company, I shouldn't say every company, the companies that buy healthcare benefits for their employees, they have PHI, right? The companies that buy insurance for you, right? They have PHI. So that means that they have healthcare information. So personal identifiable information, those are your personal things like your email address, your social security number, birthplace, etc. And then your PHIs are related to your healthcare. Prescription, x-ray, medical records, dental x-ray, you know, diagnosis, history of your ailments, whatever. Okay. Compliance. HIPAA required that you need to protect data all around, and retention for data is a lot longer than other type of compliance. Okay. So, and everything has to be digitized. Okay. So these are just the summary, and you can look into the information from HSS. Okay. There's a class that's going to be available in the summer, I think, and the fall, CIS41B. That's part of the healthcare security certificate. There's a high need for the security specialists that deal with the healthcare system nowadays. So these are the rules that they follow. Privacy rule, transaction and code rules. Transaction could be electronic transaction or a physical transaction. Security rule. So that security rule right there in item 3 is big for us, right? Like it deals with wireless, wired data movement, email. A lot of the things follow under number 3. Okay. And also 1 and 2. And then unique identifier rule. This is why you have a patient file number. They cannot use your date of birth. If they do, they can look it up through your date of birth, but they have a file number for you. Okay, that's HIPAA requirement. And then enforcement rule on how they would apply these rules and what kind of restrictions and requirements and violations that would be applied. So for financial company, your bank, your credit card companies that take electronic payments, that falls under Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. So this is why you see gas station stores, they use a company that is complied with GLBA. So I can buy, like I can rent point of sale system. So whenever you pay for grocery or gas or whatever, it is a service that they acquire from not necessarily the POS maker, but the company that uses that type of system, right? And so it is very different. So when you look at sales terminal and transaction, they have to comply. So it requires that the consumer privacy notice is explained. And this is why whenever there's security issues or change in the privacy law, your bank or your credit card company sends you a letter saying, or an email, right? Saying that, hey, we modified this, right? That's a requirement that the customer needs to be notified. Okay. Then you got the company that exchange on the stock market. These are the publicly exchanged company, Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Okay. So Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This is the SOX compliance. The reason why is if you ever watch, I don't know if you guys ever seen, I think they did a series on HBO called Black Monday. So if you ever watch like the old movie on Enron and stuff like that, it is about how they commit fraud through reporting and security, right? So now companies that are exchanged on the stock market, they're required to do quarterly reporting, okay? And the SEC evaluates that. So if they have questions, they will investigate that. So it requires that the executive, like Facebook CEO, to take the responsibility in the financial report. You know, Facebook got in trouble with this before, okay? And they need to make sure that they audit and identify anything that would be non-compliant. Okay. And so if you ever go for security master program, this is the area that we hit right here. There's so much stuff that's involved in that in the management process. Okay. Any question? So we can look in the next question here. So let me move the question down so I can see it all together. For number 14, the primary purpose of GLBA, SOX, and HIPAA, and those are only a few, right? There are, and then you also have to fulfill state requirement. These are federal requirement for national company, okay? To really protect your privacy, your consumer privacy, the information of the customer, and the investment for your stakeholder, okay? And so even if you're not a stockholder, but if you're a customer, right? Let's say that I have a credit card with you know, Bank of America, let's just say, right? Bank of America got to make sure that my information is protected, bless you, okay? Not everyone walk into the bank and they will be able to disclose my account information, right? They have to verify who they are and so on, okay? So healthcare, your HIPAA mandates that organization protect the privacy in the healthcare information, personal healthcare information. GLBA, it makes sure that the institution provide customer with privacy notice and what is being collected and how information is used. Now, I think the law has changed in a lot of that in general for privacy. So if they're using, you know, you ever see like, it says that when you use this web application or this website, they're going to collect your information, right? But on it, if you click on the terms of use, it will specify like how they use your information and if that can go to a third party or being sold, right? A lot of times your data is being sold to someone else. That's how they make the money, where you for that application that you're using for free, okay? To maintain your resource, your connection, your data storage, and all of that. Yeah, I mean Google, Facebook, everybody that you touch and see in today's world, in the internet, uses this, right? So required by law that if they gather your data for financial reasons, they need to notify you if that data goes somewhere else. So the next time you receive it, don't throw it away. Look at it.
What happens if you neither agree nor disagree? Press the X. What happens?
So you press the X, you agree.
You agree?
If you click the opt-out option, which is a smaller checkbox on the bottom in the fine print, then you don't, you know. And then or sometimes you click, sometimes they give you the service but limited, right? Oh, yeah. If you click the link that I do not allow, right, my information to be sold. That's why I don't use discount things in the, you know, at the store. They tell you put in your phone number, and it's a marketing, right? Your data goes, your number goes to a marketing company, and then they call you to sell you all these products. So I opt out on that.
I've noticed websites from Europe, they give you like more options to opt out as compared to the website.
Yes, different regulations. So for United States, we are, you know, we are a capitalist country, so we are, you know, we are front sales a lot, right? Everything that you use, listen to you, your browser. So, but we opt out on things we can't use some of the service, right? Even our government collects our data.
What if you use a different browser that blocks cookies?
Yeah, I mean, you can use some services like DuckDuckGo and things like that. Some of the cookies, when you block it, you cannot use it because session uses cookie, and if you block all the cookies, you don't have a session on HTTPS. So it's like a catch-22 sometimes, right?
Well, that one still stores it. It just deletes it after.
Yeah.
It's just
but cookies are used to study your spending or your browser pattern and so on, right? And in some cases now, the cameras and things like that. When you use an app, read the permission on the certificate that it tells you. Allow this app to activate microphone, camera, and so on, right? So like, for example, Google Map, it listens to you because you can voice command, right? But my question is, why would they need to use my front camera, right? Is it for biometric recognition on the app that's tied to my credential, but I already authenticated? So a lot of times you should use the least privilege principle, use it while you're in the app and not install it forever, right? Because that changes the game, because it would then listen. And then some app, it doesn't even give you that option, just install, okay? So for example, for PHI, we already talked about that, right? Prescription, x-ray, diagnosis, medical history, and so on. That relates to healthcare of the individual. So what I want to do is I want to show you this, okay? You click this link and you're going to visit HHS. So they require that, you know, companies that have breach report, okay? So I want you to take a look at all the healthcare companies in our nation that have breach or security incidents, I shouldn't say breach. Okay, and then it also tells you the type of breach that they face. So this is why cybersecurity and healthcare is so crucial, right? This is the area that we're stumbling right here. Okay, so when you go to the doctors and things like that, think about like, where does your data go, right? Because somebody has to bill, right? Somebody has to store, somebody has to document your file. So let's look down and find a California one. And you know, fortunately, you don't see a lot of California company on here, but there's County of Los Angeles Mental Health, right? And this was 420, a hacking incident. It came through email. Somebody click the link. Okay, let's go down a little bit more, and you can see some states that got impacted more than others. Okay. Then if you go down, there's Kaiser. Okay. It didn't say specifically. So it just says Kaiser Foundation Health Plan. Unauthorized access, that's an attacker. And network server, right? So it tells you the location. So that's another one. Okay. So you're going to find the California, because that's where we are, right? SuperCare 8. Network server, also an attack incident. Okay. And then you go down more. Okay. Yeah. So in the month of, so when, you know, I'm sure that you can you can generate the report that it's going to give you here. So when you look at this, you can take a look at like the type of organization that face the most. It's not about if it's going to happen, it's about when it's going to happen, right? So all the healthcare providers and the organizations, you see that they're highly impacted. Okay. So for a long time, they did ransomware, and then now it's just simply like stealing data. Okay. Theft. Just take the laptop and leave, right? So stuff like that. Okay. So by law, they have to document this. So if I own a healthcare, let's say a dental place, right? And if something happens to my system, I have to report it. Okay. All right. So pick one, and I want you to answer this question. Okay. What type of breach happened? How many individuals are impacted? It tells you here, thousands. Okay. Any questions? So just answer those based on the website information. So now we're going to talk about security incidents. Okay. And I put some link in there for you. I think IBM is like a no sound video, but it will talk a little bit about, you know, the type of breach. So a security incident can be a lot of things. Okay. It can be somebody steal a laptop to an attack to a malware. Okay. A data breach is where an unauthorized entity enter the system or the physical organization and so on and take data. Okay. So somebody can come in and, you know, take your server system. That's a breach, right? But somebody can logically go in, attack your server and take your data. Okay.
My aunt, she used to clean banks.
Mhm.
It was years ago, and they throw away computers. Why do they throw them away? I mean, it wasn't her, but I think it was like the coworkers that went and picked up the computers from the trash can. They got fired. They got fired, but like, why would they even throw it in the trash can? Why would they even throw it in the trash?
They're lazy. Right? Back in the day, there was no plan in this, right? People are just like, oh, we're done using it, throw it away, because, you know, other people might not be able to. So dumpster diving is a big business in security, right? A lot of people, I don't know, I think there was a guy that he used to record all of his video when he dumpster dived for computers, and he would like go home and fix it. He used to make videos. If I can find it, I'll put a link on in your class Canvas. Okay. But yeah, you can, you know, if they find out, then it, you know, if you're an employee, that can be a problem. But however, right, because now I think they put security camera, but back in the day, people just throw things away. Right, hard drives. I've done jobs, right, where we pull hard drives and replace hard drives, and yeah, it just went into the trash. And then, you know, something happened. They picked up the trash because my manager said just throw it in the trash. But then there are other organizations that they have a company that takes, right, their stuff and recycle it or dispose it properly. Yeah.
Like, so when you do like just build up a hard drive, I was told to take a drill and just drill it. Is that
Yes.
okay? Like,
Multiple times. You should drill through. You can use your hand drill. That's powerful, right? You punch holes through it.
okay.
Yeah, companies have a service where you know you can send them like 100 hard drive. Let's say I replace all my computers, 1,000, and they put it on like this conveyor belt, and then it's just like
Oh, it's
yeah, the machine has like really long nails that just drive it through. Yeah.
I don't think this was before I think this person wanted to pay, you know, so we were just sitting there for a really whole bunch of hard drives. I was like, wow, weird.
Yeah. Or if you don't, you know, just to be sure, you should degauss it anyways, right? You should also like clear it out before anything. Yeah. Because most of the time you recycle boards and devices for what they melted out for metal. So because your motherboard and your drive boards and stuff has silver and gold in it. So the companies that recycle that, right, they melt it out for metal.
You can also use very powerful magnets.
Yes. But who has magnets sitting around like that, right? You might, I don't.
Scientists.
Yes.
Does that work on solid state too? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think there are tutorials on how they'll tell you like the type of magnet or the strength of your magnet that you have to use. Right.
Yeah.
Whenever I dispose a micro SD, I try to break it into pieces because yeah. So or you know you can throw it into your fireplace and burn it just to melt it out. Okay. So an incident response plan. It is a plan on how you respond to various incidents, from people driving their car through your building to, right, natural disaster, fire, burns a part of the building, or a system related incident. A lot of times for us on the IT side, that's really hitting our area, right? So you have to really define, number one, the type of incidents. You can think of all the types of incidents that could happen to your company, right? Then again, you use a template and then research for the incidents that happen around, right? Common incidents and incident that could possibly physically happen around that region. For us here, earthquake and fires a lot, right? That's high in ranking. And then also attacks, as you can see, network attacks and malware and so on. Then on the plan, you should list a team of the people who's going to be responsible to respond. So you have a first responder, those tend to be security technician, right? You're sitting there running your scanner and oh, there's a flag, right? It sends you the notification. You have to report all incidents, regardless if it's low or high in level. Then the next level, they're going to take a look at that and investigate, right? So they are responding to that. Then how are you going to communicate with another, right? Who to call in the case if it's like 2 a.m. in the morning and all the managers went home, right? Who are you going to contact? Multiple numbers for those people. So you do see security specialists that deal with this, right? For the first responder, they usually now, like back in the day, I remember it was like a little card that you put in your pocket that has all the numbers in the case something happens, right? Now you just have it on your phone, but don't trust that your phone might be, you know, connecting or it has power, right? So you always have a list of people who you can call and how you're going to be able to communicate. In the case you don't have internet, right? Because our phones are voice over IP, we got to make sure we have power and satellite or an alternate connection. Okay. Reporting requirements. How is that going to be for based on regulation? Some regulation require that you also need to contact the police. Okay, so I'm going to tell you an incident. One of my friends hosted on a rack, right? So people can rent and host their sites and stuff like that. So long ago, he detected that somebody was running a child pornography farm from his house through that address, that IP address, right? It's an incident, right? Because, you know, you're using my server racks, you're running that, right? So has to report it to number one, law enforcement. So they're going to do search and seizure, right? So that's the next class, 27A. I will be teaching that also next semester or fall. Also requirement in that, right? Then that goes to not just your local police, it goes to the FBI. Most of the breach that you face, you need to also report it. So the link that I put on your note, it gives you the guidance on how to be able to report and things like that. Okay. So, and then you have to practice. You have to document like when you actually perform the exercise, because you know, you hate fire drill. I hate fire drill, right? But we have to do it. Why? Because if we don't, people don't know where the exit would be. Same thing with security incidents at work. Okay, if you don't perform exercise, nothing's gonna happen when, you know, people, it's all gonna be chaotic. Like people just go into frantic and don't know what to do. Okay. All right. 18. Natalie is a first responder for ABC Tech. Okay. What type of incident should Natalie report and when? She should report all security incidents, such as malware attacks, fraudulent activities, as soon as the incident is detected. So that's going to come from your intrusion detection system, anti-malware security application, firewall. All your security appliances will say, hey, I see something, look at me, right? And then Natalie will go look at that and say, oh, that's an incident. Okay, let's talk about forensic. Any question regarding security incidents? All right.
There's so much I want to talk about, but it's just too.
This class have a lot. Like
No,
it,
it's a lot.
27 should be like in
Some stuff.
a lot of classes.
Some stuff you can't talk.
All right. So, okay. So in forensic, when you take CIS27A, we are going to address things that you look at in order of fatality. That means that when you remove power, the data goes away. Okay. So, you know, and people are smart. They want their data destroyed, so they would try to disrupt power or storage and so on. So the things that are in cache, when I say cache, C-A-C-H-E, is essential. You have to look at that first. But we don't look at it on that system. We make an image of it and then we look at it. Okay. So your evidence, when you have an incident, you have to investigate and it requires forensic knowledge. Okay, so when you apply for a first responder, they're gonna ask you, do you know any forensic techniques? So on your resume, you have to state the tools and the things that you know. Okay. So you need to, the order of which you collect the evidence and how the evidence have the vitality point from the highest to the least. Okay. RAM, important. Okay. Storage, important. Okay. And when you collect your evidence, you have to document, because you have to say what you collected, who collects it, when you collect it, take a picture, right? Backup of a backup. So you create an image and then an image, a backup of the image in case you don't want to modify the actual real estate of the system you contaminated. Okay. So that is the chain of custody. It provides the assurance in that we control the evidence that we collect. Okay. And in the 27A, it will talk about all of these things in detail. So coming back here real quick. This is just a small section of it. Okay. So the things that you are going to collect from your cache, your RAM, your swap file, that's your page file that's on your hard disk or your solid state drive, right? Your actual storage, sometimes those can be micro SD, especially when you deal with smartphones. So an example, right? Somebody is driving on a road and got pulled over. The police, right? They claim, right? They are suspicious that this person, let's say, is dealing drugs. Okay, ask to search the trunk. Okay, and then also, right, then arrest this individual. Then want to evaluate their iPhone, right? So the iPhone gets bagged and it gets sent to forensic. IT forensic would then take the iPhone, not turn it on yet, right? Find a way to create an image. Now, issue. The iPhone, if I was this person, I get pulled over, what do you think they would do? What do you think I would do on my iPhone? I can't just sit there and delete my data. What do you think I would do on my iPhone?
Turn it off.
If I know that my iPhone has evidence that will go against me, what do I do with my iPhone? I lock my storage, right? Doesn't that make sense? Right?
On iCloud?
Yeah, on iCloud, on the iPhone itself. Okay. Okay, it's gonna take them an hour to process all of those things before they cuff the person, right? Because I've dealt with law enforcement and people with cases with forensic before, right? So what happens next, right? So now they gotta go through the whole process with IT about unlocking, right? So they need to submit the court order to Apple and request access for that account, right? That process can go from a few days to months on end. And this case can go from a few days to years, right? Because it depends on how severe the case would be. Okay. And so now what you see is you see encrypted channel that people chat on there, right? And they lock their phones. And so now you have to go to the vendor to request. Same thing with text messages, right? Even on the plain text messages on your SMS, let's say that they say, oh, there's suspicion on the evidence or even social media showing that this person posts this, right? You have to ask. Now, the person that's arrested, they can sign the paperwork saying, I, will give you the right to search whatever, but usually they don't. Then you have to go to the vendor. And a lot of the times without court order, they don't release anything because it's privacy issue, especially in California and federal. So yeah, so you have to contact and so we'll talk about that in 27A. So then, you have to build the image. So here it talks about legal hold. You see that? That will be the court order to maintain different types of data as evidence, email, database, backup. So in the court order, it's going to say, the court requires to evaluate this. So, if they are allowed, if there's a court order, we can go in and we can pull. So when we pull PC from the individual, let's say that somebody, the police goes in, take the computer, right? Now the computer have multiple user accounts. It has the suspicious person account and other people in the household account. What happens? Can I search through all the accounts? Can I look through the whole entire computer and find information? In IT, I can, right? But can I do that? My question for you. Can I look at everybody's account and see what kind of files they have on it? Because when I pull the disk, the image is going to show users in Windows, right? And I can go into each of the folder. What happens to the other people users account? This is important because, you know, you might know someone that faces problem or what you might have to operate as a specialist. Can I look at everybody's account and file? Why not?
Theoretically or legally?
Legally.
Oh, no.
Nothing is theoretically.
Hell no.
Everything is
Hell no. Legally, no.
legally you cannot. Okay.
Theoretically,
So if the
yeah,
person is arrested for and suspicious of a certain crime until proven guilty, right? And we're trying to build evidence for whichever ends, okay? It's only for that user account. So I'm going to tell you this, in this world, security world, you are going to have abundance of information. You're going to open a folder, you're going to see a lot of different things. It's your responsibility to be ethical and stick with the things that you're asked to do. Okay. Yes. So it's lame. But that's, you know, that's part of your job is to only look at that particular account. So my suggestion, if you are sharing a system, create multiple user account for people. Because if you are sharing the account, if the other person commit any kind of crime, and if you're sharing that user account, it affects you. Exactly. So make sure that, you know, if you're sharing a computer with people, make sure you give them individual accounts. It's also controlling for security
What
reasons.
if everything is, what if everybody's using the same network? You can still trace it to the
Yeah.
device.
Device and account. Okay. You know, adults, that is, right? Sometimes little kids, they do cyberbullying is like a big thing for the younger crowd, right? And then it becomes an issue and, you know, so chain of custody, everything. Any question? Okay, make sure we submit the assignment. We have a lab this week. Next week, I'm going to do a little bit of final review. I'm going to try to do that throughout the next few weeks. Make sure we get started on the practice exam for Security Plus. They wrote back from practice lab. They don't have 601. So let me see if they bought the other tool and I can use the other tool for you. My goal is to get you a voucher by the end of the semester, and they keep promising me all these things. So hopefully I'll get you the voucher so you can take your actual test. Okay. All right. Have a good afternoon. I will see you on Wednesday. Thank you.